British people are always like, join me for a bonbon at Raffles.
You know what? I wish they were like that still. They are not like that anymore.
No, you know what?
Now they are.
I mean, we shouldn't say too much because we don't want to get our guests in trouble here. But the faces are so strange on them. Have you noticed that? They're these sort of like moons with the bleached blonde. I'm thinking of like photos of British women you see like for a night out.
Wait, are you thinking about women or men?
But they're like the men are sort of like they look like a big thick piece of bread, and the women kind of look soggy in a way.
I don't know. Really?
No, I'm just kidding. But what do you think? What were you saying?
I don't know. I feel like we're talking about I feel like we're talking about like different generations of Brits.
Yes, no, we are. We are definitely. I feel like the Brits of today are like, how about some Chinese? And they'll get like a fucking, it's a little different accent. Maybe spend some years abroad. But like they'll like, here's my Chinese food. And it's just like, it's just fucking French fries and some fucking chicky fingers.
Oh man. You're talking about the Commonwealth now.
Well, it's all brain. And they're so drunk.
Jeffrey Epstein.
We should issue a warning that there's a lot of accent work in this episode when I didn't think there was going to be.
Well, we do this occasionally. We have like a guest who has like a real job, and so I don't know if we can do accent work around people with real job. You know what I mean?
He's game.
He was incredible at it.
Yeah, he does great accent work.
But I feel like being a European, you're kind of, it's like juicing. It's like taking steroids for accent work because you're exposed to so many. And mine are just like, from like my view of British people is from Absolutely Fabulous.
Hello. Oh, nice reference. Hello, everyone. I'm Liz.
My name's Bryce. Wait, Bryce. A quick caning in Singapore, fresh off a caning in Singapore. I would never cane a coolie. My name is Brace, and we are, of course, joined by producer
Young Chomsky here.
There you go.
There you go. And this is TrueAnon.
Hello. Those faulty towers.
There you go.
We had a couple of those here in New York City. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Can you hear the jackhammering outside my apartment?
I could during the interview. And I was like, what is that? Is someone jackhammering? And then I realized.
Jackhammering
yes.
outside my apartment. We're doing a remote episode today. And so the sort of like yin and yang energies of our rooms are kind of intermingling within the audio forms.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
We had to because our guest is in right across the pond.
You can't remember the fucking name of the country, can you? You can't fucking remember the name of the country. This is so you.
In the UK.
So sometimes when we're talking to somebody, this is Emmanuel. Just if you are sending this episode to anyone you're friends with, tell them to skip ahead some. But sometimes when we're talking to someone from the UK, right?
Oh, and you call it England,
I'll call it England. They'll be like, "Oh no," but I'm like, "It's all kind of England, right?" Like, I guess Wales is, there's like Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. Nobody knows.
I like that you're whispering when you're saying this.
I don't want them to
hear
me.
Into a microphone.
I'm whispering. Doesn't that sum up my whole life? But it's like, it's all kind of England, right? It's like when you close.
You could run on that platform.
When I close my eyes and think of, I don't close my eyes and think of the UK. I close my eyes and think of England. You know what I'm saying?
That's, you know what? That will be the campaign theme song for Reform.
Oh, Reform UK. I feel like we could go. I feel like the UK has so few people that we could go and become like major Reform Party politicians within like 3 months.
That's if the law doesn't get us there, though. That's the tricky thing.
They are fucking crazy. And this is a Commonwealth thing. They're crazy about not letting people in the country. They grill your ass.
I know.
Well, today we are talking about,
I hope that people have seen Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy or have read the books.
Yes.
I don't know if people have read the books. I feel like they should have seen the movies.
The
You gotta
books
watch
are
the BBC
and
one,
and of
by the
course the Smiley's People BBC
I'm more of a
miniseries,
Smiley's People gal. I gotta say.
Smiley's People's amazing. Yeah. But I mean, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, you know, the words that I was trying to say, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the movie, I will say, is very stylistically, it's like cool. Like the little,
You mean
like,
the American one? I was thinking of the BBC series, but
no,
I just
yeah,
call
the
them
American,
movies.
the movie, like the one where, like, you know,
Yeah.
it's got all the guys
What's
in
his
it.
name?
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. I think it's good. Also, the 50s, like the
Great
black and white
music.
Spy Who Came In From the Cold is good too.
Mm.
But Le Carre is like a good writer too. Like his
Sure.
writing's actually good. So
If people are familiar with that, then they will know the total outline of this story, because it, as we talked about in this episode, it is insane how much it maps onto a classic British spy novel.
yeah, I mean, it really is like tremendous. in the way that it's so note for note in some places that it's almost like you can see. I mean, even reading through the book, you know, it's
There's
just
a lot of tropes.
It's incredible. There's a lot of tropes.
But you know what? These are good tropes.
We love these kind of tropes. And yeah, it's an incredible spy story. We have today Emanuele Madolo. I don't know. I shouldn't say our guest name in an accent, should I? Emanuele Madolo, an investigative reporter at the Sunday Times, and we are talking about his investigation along with a retired colleague who had been investigating the case for decades and decades and decades, Peter Gilliman, the case of the murder of Sunday Times journalist David Holden in Cairo in 1977. It is a incredible story. They got a book out, Murder in Cairo. We'll link to it. I think I probably mentioned it at the beginning of the episode too. But yeah, it's fantastic. Let's just roll this telex.
Shall I say something?
No. You know what, Emmanuel, I'm just going to be upfront with you. Usually when we have guests, I do an incredibly rude introduction. And I often play upon tropes from where they're from, which for you is Sicilia. And I am going to not do that because you are in an isolation booth in your office, and I don't want to embarrass you there. I would feel quite badly for doing that. But let me try. Scusi, listeners.
Jesus Christ.
Scusi, listeners. We have an episode for you today with Emanuele Madolo here. I'm sorry. I have to apologize, but I had to keep doing it. I'm sorry.
I thought we were not going to do an accent.
I was not. I can't. I had to do it a little bit. Please, you understand. The business that we're in, it's humiliating. And they demand these things from us. They get angry at us if we don't do them. But I'm just going to do it straight. Emanuele Madolo from the Sunday Times, an investigative journalist, is joining us here to talk about, talk about a bunch of stuff, but specifically the murder of David Holden, former Sunday Times investigative reporter. I guess I should say former because he did die. Which
foreign correspondent, if I can say, because it was an investigative reporter.
You're right, foreign correspondent. I'm getting your title and his mixed up. About your incredible article co-authored with Peter Gilliman about this, but also your book, Murder in Cairo, which I guess you had a book launch for last night.
Yes.
It explains the half unbuttoned down shirt.
Didn't get too drunk, which is unusual for book launches in London.
I was about to say, yeah.
But I, as you said, I had to come to work today, and I'm here in the office in an isolation booth. I'm surprised. I thought the US was, very PC and prone to cancel culture and that kind of stuff. And
yes, but the
how
racial
do you get away
status
with the accent.
The racial status of the Italian has been.
It's always up for debate.
It is truly up in the air right now. And so we're sort of doing our part to kind of muddy the waters on exactly what is an Italian, if they are, if they're white American, if they're not. Regardless, though, you're in England now, or you're in the wonderful city of London. You're not in the city of London, but you're in the city of London, which is near the city of London, which I've always just.
I can see the city of London from the window, and it's sunny. So it's terrifying. It's one of those days. Doesn't happen very often.
Well, I want to ask you first, because I think this needs to kind of be said in order to have our listeners understand what the hell we're going to be talking about today. What is the Sunday Times?
That's a very good question. I ask myself that all the time. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. The oldest newspaper in England is the daily newspaper called The Times, which is the other newspaper that I work for. Then there's a long tradition in England of Sunday papers, and that's where the Sunday Times comes in. Initially, they were completely different papers, completely separate ownership, separate management or anything like that. It just happened to have the same title. That's because the Times was so influential that lots of newspapers started to mimic the title. The Financial Times, the New York Times, which funny enough, comes after the Times of London. The Times of London was founded in 1765, I think. Sunday Times comes about 50 years later. And as I said, for a long time they were separate. Now they are parts of the same group and in the process of actually merging. They're owned by Rupert Murdoch. Not sure if you ever heard of him.
Oh, yeah, we're very familiar. Love the guy.
Anyway, so they're now under the same ownership, part of the same group, which is News Corp. And in the slow process of actually merging and eventually becoming the same newspaper. But at the moment, the Sunday Times, it's a separate entity, has separate management, different editor than the Times. Obviously comes out on Sunday, which is, what says on the tin. And it's a different format to the Times, to the Daily. It's a broadsheet. If that
we know what it is. It's the one you
yeah.
push over your face and cut little holes in to look at people on the train.
Exactly.
As opposed to the big. It's supposed to says the big one that's like Diana cheated, really big, that they sell on the street there.
Yeah, tabloid is the other one, which is the small format. Anyway, that's the Sunday Times. It has a long tradition of investigative journalism. We tend to publish longer articles than the Daily. The format also helps because, as you say, it's a big paper. And in the 1960s, the Sunday Times was the first newspaper to have a dedicated investigations team, which was called Insight. It's still called Insight.
They're very famous they broke the Kim Philby story, yeah?
Exactly. So we were chatting earlier about tropes in John le Carre's novels. Mm-hmm. Well, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is the most famous, possibly most famous John le Carre's novel, was actually a fictionalized version of the Kim Philby story.
Yeah.
He included lots of different, elements from not just Kim Philby's life story, but also like some of the other Cambridge Five. We were talking about gay spies having affairs with older men and stuff like that. The reason why that's so familiar is because it really happened. The Philby stuff. Again, I'm not sure how familiar Americans are, but Philby is a big deal in England. Mm-hmm. He's considered the most damaging spy in history, in British history at least, which for the Brits is the only history that counts. Ask them about anything else. Philby was this guy. We used to work at the Times. We got him on our wall.
Yes, he was a longtime journalist, actually.
Yes, before Philby started working for MI6, aka SIS, he was a journalist at the Times, and he was reporting from a number of countries. His most famous stuff was during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s.
He cozied up to the nationalists.
Yes, he was embedded with the Francisco Franco's militias, despite the fact that even at that point, he was already working for the Soviets. And that was a very nice not very nice place to be. You are embedded with the fascists. You're reporting on behalf of the Times. But at the same time, you're feeding the Soviets with all the, military information or the intelligence stuff that Franco and his nice fascists are giving you. So anyway, he then, after the war, he became a big shot in British intelligence, ultimately becoming the man in charge of the liaison between the Brits and the Americans, between MI6 and the CIA. And he was working for the Soviets throughout that period. So that's why it's considered so damaging, because we have no idea how many people got killed because of him, but every single time the CIA and MI6 were doing some,
dropping some Belarusians to go blow up a dam or something, they would get picked up pretty quickly.
Yeah, or trying to get the president of Albania assassinated. Then the Soviet Union already knew about that, and people were just waiting for these freedom fighters to be parachuted to their deaths. So that's the kind of, that's why it became such a damaging, it's a trauma in the mindset of British culture, or British intelligence. There's also, there's some great books. My colleague Ben McIntyre has written a couple of books about this stuff. And the only reason we know about this is because in 1967, the Sunday Times, under the editorship of this guy called Harold Evans, decided to investigate what had happened with Philby. Philby at that point was considered to be a journalist who had defected to the Soviet Union 4 years before. He'd escaped from, he left Beirut and reappeared in Russia a few months later. But no one seemed to know, why. It was like he was a former diplomat. He was a journalist. Again, he'd gone back to journalism after he'd been exposed. And he was reporting from Beirut for a couple of British newspapers. But when he defected, when he went to the Soviet Union, the British public had no idea who this guy was, essentially. And it took, I think it was a year of investigating for the Sunday Times to eventually crack this case and reveal what I just said, i.e. that not only Kim Philby was a MI6 hotshot, he was in fact the guy in charge of a relationship with the CIA. So it was, it was a pretty big deal that he was actually working for the Soviets.
It's funny. It's not funny, but for people who are not familiar with this story, your point about it being this kind of like trauma in the British psyche, I think is so important, because the kind of scar tissue that this left, it completely frayed the relationship between the CIA and MI6 and MI5. It was, the Americans fully spanked the British in every way that they could, kind of humiliation, especially when the British, and you could speak to this better than I could, but my understanding is that intelligence was that's the British thing. This is we invented this. This is our craft. And they got on in the most humiliating way possible, for there to be this Soviet mole in their mix for so long. I think it was a great national humiliation is a great way to put it.
Yeah, Philby was the third, high-ranking MI6 official who'd been exposed as belonging to the Soviet Union. Actually, defected to the Soviet Union. There'd been about 15 years before that, 10 years before that, there's been the case of these two missing diplomats, Anthony Burgess and Donald MacLean.
Yes.
Who had, again, they were in Washington, they were working for MI6, they were working closely with the CIA, and all of a sudden got tipped off, you're about to be exposed, and off they were. They reappeared in Moscow shortly after that.
And famously, Anthony Blunt as well, who worked closely with the Queen, the surveyor of her pictures.
Anthony Blunt was the fourth in this Cambridge spy ring. They were called the Cambridge Five because they were all being recruited at Cambridge by this Don who was, working for the Soviets. A lot of them were gay. But yeah, no, as you were saying, you're completely right. The British were the spy masters. I mean, they were the ones who, as you said, invented this kind of intelligence gathering. And so when this happened, the embarrassment was just, beyond, completely beyond anyone's imagination. The other reason why this was such a trauma in British psyche is because they were all part of the establishment. They were all part of this, what we call here the old boys club. Pink earring, like Oxbridge, educated, posh.
Sort of chortling while sort of spitting out biscuits at the club and having a cigar.
I think I heard you guys trying to do that accent as well.
We
do a lot of accent work.
We do big accent workers. It is difficult to do. It is. I can do.
No,
I know. I can do like a butler British accent, but it's very difficult for me to do like a chortling old boy.
Yeah,
the different registers that you have to hit when you're trying to. It's difficult.
It's down here. I'm not going to attempt to do it because I'd be ridiculed by my colleagues. But I can say that was the reason why they just couldn't believe it. I mean, there's a great TV series which is taken from this book that my colleague at the Times, Ben McIntyre, has written, which is called A Spy Among Friends. They made it into a TV series here in England with Guy Pearce playing Philby and Damien Lewis playing this other guy, Nicholas Elliott, who was his best friend. They were best friends, and Philby not only betrayed his country, he also betrayed his friends. And for them, this is just such a big shock. I mean, they are obsessed with that kind of stuff. They're obsessed with not just, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be obsessed with loyalty and or to be patriots or whatever it is, but the establishment. So the fact that they were all coming from either Oxford or Cambridge, this is such a big deal for the Brits. I can tell you a funny anecdote. My co-author is 83. He started working for the Sunday Times in 1965, this chap called Peter Gilman. And yet, when he was writing his bio for our book, the first thing that he mentioned was that he was the editor of the university newspaper at Oxford in 1961 or something. Like that was his first line. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like,
I got it. Listen, we have our version of that here. I don't know if you guys do in Italy, but like we have like Ivy League people here who are like a little like that, but it's nothing compared. Cause it's like, as far as I know, there's two universities in the UK, Cambridge and Oxford. Yeah, and pretty much everything flows out of that. I assume that there's other ones because other people must go to the university.
There's a lot of other ones, but those are the only ones that you hear these crazy stories about. And
it's like I should not know the name of British fucking private high schools for boys. But I do. I know many of them. Like I shouldn't know any of that. I'm an American in 2025, but yet I do. And it's because they essentially like these, it was like this system in the UK just like produces the upper class. It's very like, it's almost like a factory system that just like everybody comes from this.
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of changing now, maybe, question mark. Like, how many former prime ministers didn't go to Eton College and then to Oxford or whatever?
It also probably is going to depend on the budget cuts.
Yeah. But I mean, it's very much like that. That's the apex of these people's lives. I mean, my co-author Peter is a great guy. He's written like 12 books or whatever. Some of them won awards, and and he's been a staff writer for the Sunday Times on the investigations team for like 15 years or whatever. But the fact that he was editing the newspaper at Oxford, for him, is, that's it. Anything else just, doesn't, it's not as good as that. And this is just to tell you that, like, when I'm obviously an outsider. I was born in Sicily, studied in the north of Italy, then France. And I only moved to England about 10 years ago. And all this stuff was completely alien to me. I was struggling to really understand, to grasp this sort of weird, as you say, like factory of the ruling class in England. These are the kinds of stories that you can only hear in England. You can only hear about this shit in, at Oxford or Cambridge. So it didn't really surprise me now when I was looking into this, that having lived in the UK for 10 years, that this kind of stuff was still happening. Is still happening to a certain degree, but it was still happening when my guy David Holden went to Cambridge after the war, or actually he went during the war, because Philby belonged to a different generation.
Yeah.
Philby was it was before the war, and crucially, I mean, all these people are so shocked by what happened in Spain, right? The fascists taking power. They were terrified, as you should be, of Hitler and the Nazis, and the marching and the rest of the stuff. And they genuinely thought that the only power that could stop them was the Soviet Union. Spoiler alert: they did win the war.
Yes, yeah.
So
they didn't win the Spanish one, but yeah, they did.
They didn't win the Spanish one, despite Kim Philby. But they did effectively, in the end, they did defeat the Nazis. And but in the 1930s, I mean, after the Guernica massacre, like, there were all these moments that we now don't necessarily understand how big they were, like how much of a big deal that was. What was surprising about Holden is that Holden was born in 1924, so was younger than this generation, these Cambridge Five. But this is a spoiler alert. I mean, how much are we going to say about this stuff? Like,
I mean, let's just if it makes sense to talk about, let's talk about it.
Yeah, because obviously, right. So how did a Sicilian property journalist got onto this crazy spy story with all sorts of twists and turns? MI6, CIA, KGB, the Mukhabarat, the Egyptian Secret Service, gay lovers, and plots of overthrowing regimes in faraway places. Like, how the fuck did I get myself into this? The reason is because when I moved to this country, I wanted to become an investigative journalist. I used to live in France. I was working for a French newspaper. And I went to uni. I didn't go to Oxford. I didn't go to Cambridge. I went to something called the City University, which is considered the best journalism school in England, hence in the world. Not in the world, but after. It's considered, the best journalism school in Europe, which is crazy because it was shit. It was really bad. It was really, really bad. During a session of training in investigative journalism, I met this guy, Peter Gilman, who was then in his 70s, I'd say. And Peter would tell us these war stories about the glory days of the Inside Team, the golden age of investigative journalism, and the legendary editor, Harry Evans. This was the team that had cracked, the Philby case, and had been campaigning for years to get the victims of this pregnancy drug called thalidomide to get compensated by the government, by the state. Plain disasters. Like, also they were investigating the sexist stuff out there, espionage, like plane crashes, and all sorts of crazy things. And then at the end of this training, Peter would say, I told you about my successes. Now let me tell you about the one time that we failed. And he proceeded to tell us the story about David Holden, who was this guy who was a foreign correspondent at the Sunday Times in the 1970s, who was sent to Cairo to report on a peace conference between Egypt and Israel. Had been on a 10-day swing across the Middle East, traveling through multiple countries. Cairo was to be the last crucial step of his journey, but as soon as he landed in Cairo, he disappeared. He was found the next morning, dead, next to a busy road, and the autopsy later revealed that he'd been shot once to the heart. Now, as you can imagine, the shock at the Sunday Times was, as Harry Evans described it, was profound. This was the only guy who's been killed while reporting peace. He wasn't a war correspondent who had been blown up by a mine, like a guy called Nick Tomalin, Sunday Times foreign correspondent, had been killed 3 years before that on the Golan Heights during the war between one of the wars between Egypt and Israel. This guy was just there to cover a peace conference, and somehow he was taken at the airport by someone, driven around in two cars that turned out to be stolen, and then shot. Close range, so much close range that the bullet was still found in his blazer.
Oh wow!
So Harry Evans, the editor, sent a team of 6 journalists to the Middle East to retrace Holden's steps, try to find out what he did, what happened, and basically answer the 2 main questions: who killed Holden and why. They spent a first week there. They amassed a huge amount of information about Holden's travel plans and the people he met, but gaps and inconsistencies started to appear. They couldn't really figure out what Holden had been doing in at least a couple of afternoons during his trip. And there were some people that were saying certain things that were disputed by others. It sounded like someone was trying to either was lying, or they were trying to provide an alibi for either for Holden or someone else. And all sorts of question marks started to emerge. So Harry Evans the editor got a few people to work on this thing full time. And Peter Gilman eventually was asked to expand the investigation to basically check this guy's entire life, to try and find out. Because the last week, his last trip to the Middle East didn't give the answer as to why he was killed and by whom. And so that's when they decided we're gonna try and find out as much as we can about this guy, and then we're confident. This was the methods that they were using. Now, if we get all the facts, just put them in a timeline, the answers will emerge, and the mystery would be.
I find it, if I could just interrupt real quick, I find it a little interesting that was the immediate response. I mean, obviously the immediate response to send people to the Middle East to retrace his last steps. But I feel like at a certain level, you would assume if somebody was abducted off the street in Cairo or taken off the street in Cairo in some way and shot through the heart, that the murderer would likely be in some way related to what he was doing in Cairo, or related to Cairo itself, some sort of, criminal gang or something. It's interesting that there must have been some suspicion that it could be larger than that if you're, going over his entire life, because, it's not like somebody from his Fleet Street tailor was like going down there to smoke him for because he didn't pay his bills or whatever.
Well, yeah, initially, like this is interesting because the Egyptians, so they didn't allow these two investigators from Scotland Yard, from the British police, to actually go to Egypt and investigate themselves, which in retrospect is probably telling. They started saying, it could have been a robbery gone wrong. Maybe it was hitting on a taxi driver. Did you know if this guy was gay or not? Which is a classic thing that the Egyptians always say when someone gets killed, shot in the back with a 9mm.
Maybe he was gay.
Are you sure he wasn't gay, this guy? Anyway, then terrorists, maybe it was terrorists that were trying to, interfere with the peace conference. This, I have to say, and again, I mean, people in this country don't know very little about this shit, but this was after the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, had gone to Israel, had gone to Jerusalem for the first time. This was the first official visit of an Arab leader to effectively to Israel. He talked at the Knesset, the Israel
Parliament.
Parliament, yes. Yeah. And that implicitly recognized Israel's right to exist. I mean, Israel and Egypt had been in a few wars throughout the year. Most recently, in 1972, what became, what was called the Yom Kippur or the Ramadan War. So the fact that the president of Egypt, of all countries, would decide to actually go there, do this symbolic visit, was just something, it came as a massive shock to all these people. And it created all sorts of problems in the Middle East because until then, there was this very united front of Arab states that did not recognize Israel as a legitimate state. There was the Arab-Israeli war in the 40s, and then what was it? Another war in 1967. But basically, all these countries were all together. All the Arab countries were all together against Israel, and Israel was just routinely kicking their asses on its own.
Yeah.
And the fact that Egypt was doing this was just was unprecedented, and also caused all sorts of problems to its allies in the region, because they, people like Gaddafi from Libya,
you had
Syria,
Assad,
Assad,
the elder
Assad's father, Assad's father, not our guy. They were shocked by this move, and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna do a rejectionist rejectionist conference because we think this is a bad idea, and we oppose all this stuff." So basically, like, it was like, was he killed by Palestinian terrorists? Was he killed by the Mossad? Like, did he do something that?
Yeah, because I mean that's something you guys mentioned, because the Sunday Times had written about conditions in Israeli prisons sort of shortly, not so shortly, but before
6 months before.
6 months before he was killed.
Holden had actually been named in the Israeli press as the author of that investigation, which. It wasn't. I mean, it had nothing to do with that investigation. Actually, the guy who'd done that investigation was my co-author, Peter. So the Sunday Times actually issued a correction and say it wasn't David Holden, it was this guy. Peter's like, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, great. Yeah, wonderful.
Because Insight at that point didn't have bylines, I have to say. Which is the reason why when Harry Evans was dispatching Peter to the Middle East, he said to him, beware of Mossad. They're the best intelligence agency in the world. And Peter looked at him and was like, okay, thanks. Like,
okay, well, cool. Thanks, man.
Well, it's very good. Like,
beware.
But also, like, how am I supposed to do that?
You're supposed to beware. Well, it's, beware stands for be aware. So it's, it's just,
right. Beware Mossad might try to kill you,
Yeah. But you could figure it out.
To answer your question, why did they decide that maybe it had to do, it was something to do with something more complex than, just him hitting on a taxi driver, as the Egyptians seem to suggest,
Yes.
or someone just stealing his wallet and decided to shoot him in the back. And the reason for that is because during the second trip that they made to the Middle East, so they made a number of trips. I'm not going to go into the kind of, Peter went at least 3 times, I think. During the second trip, which was a crucial one, at the Sunday Times here in London, and it wasn't this office, it was a different office, but they realized that someone was stealing these messages that the team on the ground was sending back to the office. And then upon more, upon closer examination, they realized that also like Holden's messages had also been stolen. So that was a shock. Like it was like, what's going on here? Like,
so these guys, David Holden and Peter Gilman, people dispatched to look into this and the subject of the investigation itself, were sending these telex messages back to the office, and somebody was stealing the telexes.
Yeah, so the telexes are this sort of, it's a bit more advanced than a telegram. They are messages that are typed and then transmitted through a machine, like a fax.
Mm-hmm.
Like the grandpa of faxes, basically.
Well, it seems like midway between the telegram and the fax.
Yes.
Hence the telefax.
Now this is real George Smiley here. Someone
I gotta
intercepting
say,
all these messages.
I gotta say, dude. I mean, just everything about this. And first of all, the fact that even, and I know this is a trite point to make, just the fact that Peter Gilman, I mean, very close in name to a central character in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, but the telex is being stolen. It's just like it's like almost on the nose kind of like spy novel of the time.
Well, they obviously at that point they didn't think it that way. They just all they were concerned was that someone was stealing their messages. Were they trying to find out where they were going and what they were doing? Like, are they actually going to meet the Holden's killer? In the worst possible way, as in were they going to get themselves killed as well, just like Holden? And also the other question was, did Holden's killers knew when he was going to Cairo because they stolen the telexes from the Sunday Times office? Like, that was the big question. Like, because what became clear after a couple of weeks was that the timing of these thefts of these cars, there were 3 cars involved in the operation to kill Holden. The first car was this, they were all battered Fiat. I don't know why they decided to use an Italian car. Probably because they're very reliable.
Yeah, they were like, we need to steal the best cars in Cairo.
The best cars in Cairo are Fiat. They stole these 3 cars. They were reported stolen at crucial moments. I can't remember exactly when, but the first car, which is the one in which he was abducted at the airport, was stolen at the day after they confirmed that he was going to the Middle East. Because initially Holden did not want to go to the Middle East. So first car, Holden says yes. First car gets stolen. Then a couple of weeks later, as he was approaching the end of his trip, 24 hours before he was getting to Cairo, car number 2, which is the one in which he was shot, and car number 3, which is the one in which the killers did their getaway, were stolen. So they knew exactly when he was going to. They knew exactly that he was going to the Middle East to begin with, and they knew precisely when he was going to Cairo. And that was something that was baffling to the investigators. They were like, how the fuck did these people know? Like, what was happening? So when the telexes were stolen, the guys at the Sunday Times were like, hang on a second, did they get them? Did they get this information from the horse's mouth? Did they get it from us? Like, were the people who stolen the telexes the same people who killed Holden? I mean, it was a terrifying thought, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because he disappears pretty much right after getting into the country too. Like, he flies into Cairo, Obviously there's some confusion, which we can talk about in a sec, about what he was previously doing that day in Jordan, I think, right? But he flies into Cairo, and then instead of going to like the designated taxi area, he is just disappears. He gets into this car with these other guys and is never seen. Well, next time he's seen, he's got a hole in his heart.
Yeah, I mean, the autopsy revealed that he was killed at some point between 3, I think, in the morning. I mean, he landed at 11, got out of the airport at around midnight, was picked up by someone, driven around for a while, took it into the second car, then shot, then dumped on the side of the road. So it was, that quick. I mean, the guy never even reached Cairo city, as far as we know.
So Peter is assigned this story, but how far does he actually get with it? I mean, it seems like it seems like one of the big. I mean, what I found sort of touching about the book, especially, is that you kind of go to Peter and you're like, let's figure this out, and he's just like raring to go. He talked to you about this, about being one of his failed investigations when he taught the course, but it seems like he had this like giant, almost like dossier that he'd compiled for the Sunday editors the Sunday Times editorial staff that was never actually published, but it was almost like a dossier that Peter himself had made.
So this report, which he calls the Holden report, was actually for the editor's eyes only, and Peter spent a year investigating this thing, right? Investigating the guy's life. That was the moment when, after he came back from the Middle East the second time, that's when Harry Evans said, "Look, this is very troubling. Everything is happening. It doesn't add up. This is not just a journalist getting killed. Like, this stuff about the theft of the telexes and, all these inconsistencies that you found, like there's something going on here. So I want you to enlarge, the scope of the investigation, try to find out as much as you can about who this guy was. We thought we knew him. Turns out we didn't. Like, go out, talk to everyone, find out as much as you can. No expense spared." Those were the days. He spent a year on the case, on one investigation. He wasn't doing anything else. It was the longest he ever spent on an investigation. And then in November 1978, so Holden was killed December 1977. In November 1978, Peter wrote this 30,000-word, 110-page report for Harry Evans' eyes only. It was inconclusive. He had a number of theories and a number of suspicions. But the problem was that even if they wanted to publish something at that point, they couldn't, because the Sunday Times was closed. Literally, the newspaper literally just closed a few days before that. It didn't come out for a year because the ownership of the Sunday Times was engaged in this battle with the print unions. Now, this sounds very strange, but back in the day, and again, this is where you might want to do like a 40-minute introduction episode about what the print unions were like in the 1960s and 70s in England. But these print unions were so powerful because they were just going on strike for whatever reason. Like, they wanted more pay, they wanted more hours, they wanted this, they wanted that. They could just completely, they could stop newspapers from being printed, and it often happened. Like, it was something that they would just like, we're not going to get the newspaper out today, and you can get fucked. So that situation got to this escalation, and the management of the Sunday Times decided that they were not going to print any newspaper for a year unless they got onto some sort of agreement with the print unions. Spoiler alert, they didn't. That's when Rupert Murdoch comes in, crashes the unions, introduces new technology, printing new technology with computers, and effectively, some people say saved British journalism. Some other people say, kind of crashed this social movement and, took away all the rights of these people. And anyway, we're not going to get into that. But the main point is, nothing could be published. There was no newspaper. And Harry Evans was then moved by Rupert Murdoch from the Sunday Times to the Times, which was the sister publication. Peter was assigned to other duties. But this case, I mean, it was just the one that got away, the one that they couldn't do it. And in 2020, when Harry Evans died, it was 92, I think it was. By the way, for American listeners, you might not know who Harry Evans is, but Tina Brown, Harry Evans' wife is Tina Brown, who I think it should be still pretty famous in America.
She is, yeah.
And so Harry Evans dies. That's when I emailed Peter. I joined the Sunday Times only a few months before. I emailed Peter, expressed my condolences. I knew that they were friends, just other than colleagues. And that's when Peter says, well, he starts reminiscing about the old times once again. He loves doing that. But then at the end of the email, he was like, the last 2 times I've seen Harry, he told me that he was still troubled by the Holden case and asked me to have another go at it, try to see it through.
And Peter's like 80 himself at this point, right?
Peter at that point is like, pushing 80. And he said, Harry told me, we must solve the case.
Oh my God.
And so now you're doing the voice. You're doing the voice.
I'm doing the accent. But then now Peter, Harry's dead and I'm old and, it's
a different time.
Mystery. Yeah, it was a different time. And I was like, whoa, this is just like, I started doing a bit of research just by doing a bit of Googling. Like, by the way, the Wikipedia page for David Holden is shit. It's like full of conspiracy theories. So anyway, I started doing a bit of digging. There wasn't much out there really about this. Harry Evans had written about this in one of his memoirs. He'd written a chapter about the Holden case, which was based on the report that Peter published. But they did find some declassified files that were related to Holden. And so I shared my findings with Peter. And that's when Peter invited me to his house in South London. And he literally handed me this 107-page report, which I had no idea existed. I went home, read it in one sitting until like 2 a.m. in the morning or whatever. And I was completely blown away by that because it read like a real John le Carre's novels. There were all sorts of twists and turns, like mistaken identities and double dealings and characters that were, if I read about those characters in a novel, I would have not believed them. It was that far-fetched and that dramatic, but it was all true. And he had all this evidence. He had all these boxes in his office, in his house office, and he decided to share all this stuff with me. And that's when I started reinvestigating the case. First checking all the names, see if these people were alive, and most of them sadly weren't. A lot of them had actually died, either as I got back onto the case or they died just before I could contact them. Mm-hmm. It was that kind of generation, people in their 80s and 90s, and especially during COVID. Very frustrating experience.
Yeah, it's funny actually. You can kind of see that throughout the book, because you'll mention somebody that like it seems clear that you really want to talk to, and then it'll like in parentheses it'll be like that such and such died in 2017 or such and such died in 2019.
You have no idea. You have no idea like how many times. And there's some people's like, so and so died age 100 in 2021, and I'm like, anyway. The problem is sometimes we did get in touch with Peter. We did get in touch with people who were there, who knew the guy, etc. And they were like, I don't know, it was 60 years ago. Like, how do you want me to remember anything about this stuff? And that's a kind of theme in the book, like memory play such a big part. Like we had this moment where we were like, we'd been looking for this particular guy who was the MI6 chief in the Middle East. He was the head of MI6 in the Middle East. And we weren't sure whether this guy was still alive. Someone said he was dead. Eventually we found him. He lived in Bath, which is a very nice city west of London. And we managed to find a number for him. And we were like, yeah, we're going to call him and see what, maybe he doesn't want to talk to us. And Peter talked to him and the guy was like, yeah, I'd be very, very happy to help you. Except I have to warn you, I have dementia.
Oh, no.
So it's been, it's been one of those, like, this is the problem. Like the next thing I do, I'll make sure everyone is dead, or everyone is
or
alive.
22 years old.
Yeah. Because this has been the most frustrating experience.
I mean, there is a certain point in the book, especially when you're sort of reconstructing his last days, and you're kind of looking into some of the people that he's spending time with, and realizing that a huge number of them who otherwise have relatively, inconspicuous or unremarkable kind of cover stories actually were either former and heavily implied, perhaps present members of intelligence services. I mean, there's a gentleman whose name I wrote down, but unfortunately
John Fistier.
John Fistier, yeah, who he has a sort of mysterious lunch with, or maybe just like a quick confab, who turns out to be like a former OSS agent, and a Palestinian academic who kind of gives this alibi that, like, oh, I saw him, we were in the West Bank together, and then you come to realize that he's maybe was not in the West Bank with him, and in fact the academic now lives in the United States with citizenship, which would be a little unusual for people of that caliber. I mean, at what point did things sort of start clicking for you in like a major way here?
Right. So there's this sort of recurring theme where Peter had suspicions about someone, but he couldn't prove them. Right. And at that point, obviously, these people were alive. They could have sued him, which is why that report that he'd written was for the editor's eyes only. It was confidential information because it was potentially libelous to these people. He didn't have a piece of paper that said, CIA, yes, we employed this guy to keep an eye on Holden. But he found he found that there were so many coincidences, so many people seemed to be effectively trying to find out what Holden was up to, what he was doing, the people he was meeting, and it's not necessarily something that, as a foreign correspondent, like Peter was a foreign correspondent himself, and it just seemed very odd. Like the people that Holden was meeting, it wasn't just, of course, I mean, he was attending some press conferences and, interviewing the British ambassador to blah, blah, blah. But sometimes he was meeting this guy, and it was like, this guy heavily smells of CIA. Like he's the first secretary to the U.S. embassy in Damascus. And I'm like, what's this guy up to? Like, what was going on? But as I said, like he had these suspicions. He suspected, for example, Fistier to be lying about his encounter with Holden on the day he died. Because Holden was flying from Amman to Cairo, and Fistier was seen in Holden's company. He did not volunteer the information. He did not come across and say, came forward and say, I saw him. I can. Some people did. There was this beautiful French journalist called Kenise Mourad. She approached Peter in the reception of the hotel and said, "Are you with the Sunday Times? I met your colleague, David Holden. He was a wonderful man." I'm making the accent.
That's right, you're doing the accent. You lived in France, so it's not too tough.
I know, that's exactly how she speaks, by the way. I went to see her in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago, and that's exactly how she speaks. So she volunteered this information. She was told, did you hear, madame, like the Mr. Holden was killed in Cairo. She didn't know anything about this stuff, and then she went to Gilman, and because they said this gentleman from the Sunday Times is here to investigate Holden's death, and so she approached Gilman, and she volunteered to tell him everything they'd done together, to the point of even getting into details about, oh yeah, we had dinner twice, and then he invited me up to his room, and I stayed there until 1 a.m. And it's like ... And Peter's being British, he's not like.
He's not like, so did you have sex with him? Because that would be my question. But obviously the British mind, they're like,
jolly good, yeah.
A sherry perhaps. Although from what we know about David Holden, it seems maybe likely they did not have sex. Although who knows?
She said, this is the. Can I say this?
Yeah.
This is the only thing that my editor wanted to know. Like, he sent me to Istanbul 2 weeks ago, and he's like, I want to know. Did she sleep with him? And I had to ask her the question, did anything romantic happen? And she said, no, I mean, he was old. It's just like...
he wasn't that old.
Well, he was 53. She was like, she was a stunner. I've seen pictures of her as a young woman. And, she was like, no. I mean, I was just... because he was such a respected figure. It's what was called an old hand in foreign correspondence circles. And then she went and she said, by the way, you're telling me now that I wasn't his type. So,
yeah, it's true. Yeah. Well, it could be. He could be a bisexual.
He could have been bi.
He was married to a woman, right?
Yeah.
He was married to a woman again. So inside back in 1977, they started finding all sorts of strange things about the guy's sex life. Like, they found that he'd been in this relationship for 10 years with this older man, a guy called Leo Silverman, and by what they heard from the guy's brother, the guy was dead. Leo was dead, but Leo's brother told Peter that it was a very passionate relationship, and then what they found was that Holden was actually trying to follow Silverman around. Silverman was an academic. He was a bit of a con man. He was telling people different stories about his background and where he was coming from. He was born in Frankfurt in Germany in 1915, but sometimes he was telling people he was born in South Africa instead.
Yeah.
Sometimes he was faking the fact that he'd never been to Britain, despite the fact that he actually lived in Britain for many years, because his family, he was a Jewish, he was coming from a Jewish family, and so Frankfurt in the 1930s wasn't exactly the best place to be for a Jewish family.
Yeah.
So the family scattered. They sent Leo to England to study. They had a family house here in London. They first sent him to school in Switzerland, actually, but then they moved to London. Anyway, they had this crazy, passionate relationship with Holden. And then when Holden was hired by the Times in the 1950s, they found from reconstructing Holden's movements, because he was already a foreign correspondent at that point, that he was trying to follow Silverman around. Silverman was going to Sudan, and all of a sudden Holden started to become very interested in Sudan. And he sends these letters to the foreign editor of the Times and say, I need to go to Sudan. There's some interesting stuff going on there. I was like, why the fuck should we care about Sudan? Like, you are in whatever, Egypt, Beirut, just stay there. Like, we got a guy doing Africa, whatever. Like, why do you want to go to Sudan? But he was nagging there. He was literally like, if you don't send me, I'm going to go on annual leave to Sudan. It's like, I don't think Sudan in 1954 was such a great place for a holiday, to be fair.
I don't know. Sudan in 2025 is the greatest place for a holiday either.
Probably
but-
worst place.
But yeah, so I mean, Leo is sort of because Leo was doing a strange. I might be remembering this wrong, but I was reading this last night. But like Leo was there on some strange grant that he claimed to be there on some grant.
So Leo was claiming, as I said, he was a bit of a con man. He was claiming that he had a PhD from Oxford, which he didn't. He started, then he dropped out, but he was still using the Oxford, what do you call it? Like the
letterhead?
Masthead. Yeah, letterhead.
Yeah.
So
I guess back then you could just say you were anything, and it's like it would take so long to check. You could probably get away with a crime.
Yeah, well, funny enough, the CIA, spoiler alert, did check, and they checked and found out that it was not associated with Oxford, with this particular college at Oxford that he was claiming that he was. Now, the question is why the CIA wanted to know this. That's a whole different matter. But anyway, so Silverman was technically an academic. He was writing these academic papers, but at some point he got this ridiculous grant of what in today's money is like £175,000 to study disputes between the border of, and again, Somalia and Ethiopia.
Yeah, Ogaden.
Somalia was called Somaliland. You know all about this stuff, obviously. But it sounds like a lot of money to actually study some, border disputes.
Definitely.
Anyway, rewind. What was I saying? Yes, the marriage. Holden's wife was a journalist called Ruth. She'd been working for Life magazine. And I talked to a few people. Some of her best friends are actually dead, sadly. But I managed to talk to some extraordinary characters, including this 95-year-old neighbor of hers, who said, "Oh yeah, she was gay as well. Like she never she was clearly
double beard."
That's what we call a marriage of convenience.
Yes. Yeah, back in the day it was called a lavender marriage, which is a nice word.
Sure.
I found. And by all looks, it was a marriage of convenience. They didn't have any kids. They were both traveling for long periods of time. They seemed to be very close, to be honest. They seemed to be caring, and which I guess, that was,
makes sense.
You must have had some sort of complicity, but I don't think Holden was bi, because some of the things that Peter found during his research was that he was a good-looking bastard, David Holden. I don't know if you've seen the pictures. Like, he had this kind of, Roger Moore-esque attitude.
I was going to say like Robert Redford, but British. Like, there's a kind of like...
Yeah, British Robert Redford, a bit less hairy, maybe.
Yeah, a little.
But
yeah.
All these people, all these women were falling for him. They were all falling in love with him, and he never, again, in a very British way, they were all saying like, never took the hint, like, never.
Well, in so many ways, it seems like Holden was like the picture of this almost stock character of like British establishment journalism. Somebody in a sham marriage who, is a privately practicing homosexual who is rather conservative in his political beliefs. I mean, you mentioned, and this is sort of a maddening aspect of this the story. Like, he goes to these sort of various countries on assignment, but he also is a almost a polemicist in some ways, and writes for Encounter magazine. And I think that listeners of ours might be familiar with Encounter. We've talked about it in a couple episodes. They're sort of like one of the more famous magazines that the CIA funded during the Cold War period as part of like their sort of soft power cultural battle with the Soviets. And he had written an article in particular that was very unkind, one might even say unfair, to Fidel Castro. And so it's in many ways he is like a typical like British conservative journalist.
Yeah, Actually, the one about Castro was probably softer than the one he wrote about Allende, Salvador Allende of Chile. And that's kind of telling because like you were not allowed to write and publish that kind of shit not even in the Times, which is not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's necessarily conservative, but it's it's the establishment paper. And especially like back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s, it was like, the voice of Britain and blah, blah, blah. Like reporters didn't have bylines because technically you're not allowed to have a voice. Like it's the voice of the Times. And, they had this nickname, the Thunderer. So it's like all this. He couldn't write that kind of stuff for the Times, then later for the Guardian or the Sunday Times. The fact that he was doing it for Encounter magazine is interesting. The fact that he was like the piece about Allende was just baffling. Like it was a vitriolic attack on Allende, what he called a socialist experiment, and I mean it was almost like a fascist piece of writing because of the stuff that he was saying. Some people were very surprised by that because they remember that Holden was quite left-wing actually when he was a young man. So did he just become a bit more conservative as he was growing old, or was there something there?
Perhaps a Starmer type, He spent his youth in wild radicalism and is now, getting Britain back in shape.
Do people in the US know who Starmer is?
We do.
We know him as the knife, as the man who will ban the ninja swords.
Yeah, as of yesterday. But we find him fascinating as almost like a homunculus like figure because we have some very odd looking physically politicians. And particularly Elon has like a very large face, and I think Starmer is your largest face politician. So we sort of in our primitive republicanism here think of the British system as almost like you elect your biggest physical freak, which would account for a large number of former prime ministers.
But
no, we've talked about Starmer at length, just due to the nature of his dome, and so I think that our listeners should be familiar. But he was, for those who don't know, he was a Trotskyist as a youth, and then as now charting an amazing course for British socialism.
Yeah, so to speak. So Peter again, had all sorts of suspicions about some of the people that Holden met during the trip. You mentioned this guy John Fistier, right? So Fistier, as I said, did not volunteer any information. It had been seen by someone, and so they said, "Oh yeah, Mr. Fistier was with Mr. Holden. I want to speak with him." Showed up stone drunk on both occasions of when he was interviewed, and he said that Holden. That he met Holden only for 5 minutes. I mean, he knew Holden. He said he knew Holden since the 1950s. They were both in Beirut, which is interesting because you may remember who else was in Beirut in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Kim Philby. And funny enough, Philby, Holden, and Fistier were part of a group of friends who would go on were having these great parties and, drinking themselves to death, essentially. And anyway, that's
interesting.
Yeah. So Fistier said, I only seen him for 5 minutes in the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel in Amman, but he was in a terrible hurry to catch his flight, and he was going into the telex operator room to try to confirm the booking of his hotel in Cairo because he didn't know where he was going to stay. It was, kind of angry and, in a rush and, and I only talked to him for a couple of minutes and that was it. But then there's this guy called Bisharat who had a travel agency inside the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel who said, actually, I've seen Mr. Holden just after lunchtime walking away with Mr. Fistier. So it wasn't at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. as Fistier was saying. It was actually around maybe 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. And I did not see them again. No one had seen him in the telex room. None of the operators remember him going and desperately trying to confirm whether he had a booking at one of the hotels. And strangely, had he done that, he would have found a telex that had been waiting for him for 3 or 4 days, which confirmed that he actually had 2 bookings in 2 different hotels. So, you could just pick and choose. So what was going on there? Like, Peter wondered, is this guy telling us porkies? Is he misremembering? I mean, maybe he's a drunk. Like, what's going on? But then talking to a few people, that's when they heard that Fistier was rumored to have been sent to Beirut to keep an eye on Philby. And it got very close to Kim Philby and during that time in Beirut. Now, at that point, what Peter didn't know is, of course, that John Fistier had been a big shot in the Office for Strategic Services, the OSS, which was the forerunner of the CIA during World War II, and was doing all sorts of secret missions in Europe. And someone was saying that this was the travel to tourism board that he had in Jordan was actually just a front for the CIA.
Well, it does seem a bit odd that an American would move to Jordan and basically work at a tourism board. I mean, it seems like there might be other opportunities for somebody who knew Europe so well.
He was essentially, the way he was described as King Hussein's main publicist. And King Hussein was very close to the CIA.
Yes.
To the point that the US at some point had to recall an ambassador to Jordan because the king wouldn't talk to this guy. He just wanted to talk to the nice guys at the CIA station down in Amman.
He just like, I don't like the ambassador.
This guy.
Stuffy.
Yeah, just send me the CIA people.
Yeah.
It's always good to cut out the middlemen, like get in front of the guy.
And anyway, in one of there's this guy John Connor who was the CIA station chief in Amman, who at some point mentions this tourism board as one of the organizations that, guess what, the CIA was just using as a front. And so now the question is, was Fistier one of the people that, like many ex-OSS officials, had he been recruited by the CIA? I mean, crucial detail. I talked to this guy who used to date Kim Philby's daughter.
Wow.
I'm not going to say who it is because he's kind of embarrassed by it. But at some point, Kim Philby's daughter was hired by Fistier. She was 16, I think, to work for this tourist board. That at that point was in Beirut. So this was like the kind of, they had an office in Beirut, and this guy was working for this travel agency / tourist board in Beirut, as you do,
Sure.
And you know what? I might have some work for your daughter. It's like, well, she's 16. She doesn't speak Arabic, so what? Like, what's?
Philby was amazing. I mean, you gotta give him credit. I mean, he really, I give him a lot of credit, but like even his detractors gotta tell you. I mean, the guy was really, he was a mission first individual. They could call that today locked in. I don't think there has been a guy as locked in as Kim Philby since Kim Philby.
Especially because this guy, all these people are alcoholics, right?
Yeah.
It was the 50s and 60s. Great times. They could drink you down to the table, but like to keep that kind of, someone called face where they were like one of my favorite anecdotes is coming from the memoir of a guy who used to work here as a foreign correspondent. At some point, it was also in Beirut around the same time. Knew Holden Anyway, they were throwing these massive parties in this house on the hills, and Philby was there. This guy Fistier was there. Douglas Copeland, who was this CIA guy,
Oh yeah,
who was the
father of Stuart Copeland.
Police
Yeah,
drama.
yeah.
Anyway, they were all getting drunk. They, kind of shagging around as well, as you do. And at some point, Moira, who's the wife of this guy, this British foreign correspondent, said to Philby, said, Kim, so are you a Soviet agent? Because that was the rumor. At that point, the rumor was that Philby was the third man in the Cambridge spy ring, and that he was the one who tipped off McLean and Burgess, and that's the reason why they managed to escape from the US to the Soviet Union, which turned out to be exactly the case, by the way. It was all true. Like, the rumors were all true. Anyway, she was drunk, and she was like, and she said that at that point, Philby was completely fucking wasted, like shit-faced. And she was like, come on, Kim, you can tell me, are you a Soviet spy? He sobered himself immediately, grabbed her from her wrist and said, Moira, I always felt that loyalty to my friends is more important than loyalty to my country.
Which is, it's so funny because one of Philby's famous quotes is that, like, in fact, one that I believe he gave to the Sunday Times in 1967 is that I am a political person and a private person, but when they come into conflict, the political person comes first. Which is such a, I guess he wrestled with these concepts a lot. I want to get back to Holden real quick, because there is a certain whiff of intelligence about him with a lot of the descriptions that you sort of read, even just from like a cursory glance. But it would certainly not be out of line with the intelligence agency's use of journalism both as a cover and then placing actual journalists in as or agents in as journalists, and then also recruiting journalists as agents and assets. And something that's so might sound very silly to people. In fact, that I think objectively does sound silly just in general, because it is quite silly, is that the inventor of James Bond, Ian Fleming, was the editor at the Sunday Times. No,
foreign editor. Yeah,
editor.
It was in charge of the foreign correspondence. It was in charge of this thing called the Mercury Group, and so Ian Fleming is obviously notoriously the father of James Bond. He wrote the James Bond novels, but before that, he was in naval intelligence in World War II, and after that, he became the foreign editor of the Sunday Times. And guess what? He started hiring all these people that were working with him in either MI6 or naval intelligence to be foreign correspondent. They all spoke, however how many languages. They could move around. They knew how to write these reports, and so it trained them to actually to write stories as well. But at the same time, what he was doing was also getting what they were called situation reports, sit reps. They were not for publication, and you can guess where they were going.
Yes.
And he placed all these people. Like, there was this guy called Tony Terry who was sent to Vienna and then Germany. A lot of the stuff that this guy was actually doing back in those days, in the 1940s and 1950s, would end up feeding the James Bond novels.
Amazing.
In the latest films, obviously the Cold War element has kind of gone out of the window. But in the James Bond novels, there's a lot of stuff about the Germans and East Germany. It's proper Cold War shit. And like Spectre was not a thing until later on. It was all about Smersh, which was this
death to spies.
Death to spies. Yeah, I can't remember what it was. Something espioning. So. Which was the real department within the KGB that was dealing with well, at that point, there wasn't a KGB or the current
MVD or whatever the fuck it was. They changed the name,
NKVD.
which is
They changed
great.
the names.
It's a very smart idea of them to do.
So Smash was actually, the one who was actually killing people. Anyway, Fleming sends this guy to Austria, and then this guy proceeds to work for the Sunday Times for 50 years, this guy, Tony Terry. And guess what? He's one of the 6 people that Harry Evans unknowingly sent to the Middle East to investigate Holden's life. Harry Evans had no fucking idea. Peter had absolutely no idea. There was some rumor in the office about, oh yeah, that guy's a bit of a spook. Like, there are some rumors in the office now. But they had absolutely no idea. This guy, Tony Terry, died in the early 90s. And when he died, his stepdaughter found all these letters that he kept between him and Fleming. And she essentially, she's fantastic. She lives in Australia. She's a school teacher. Her name is Judith Leonard, but she's got this fantastic inquisitive mind. And yeah, she's found all these letters. She was like, holy shit, like what's going on here? Like stepdad was a real life James Bond. And Fleming was just complimenting him and saying stuff like, here's this guy that you can interview for one of your pieces. On another note, you might want to keep an eye on this Russian bloke who has been suspected of doing this and that. It's like,
Well, it's funny because, I mean, obviously, too, famously, there was Henry Brandon of the Sunday Times, the only foreign correspondent who was present in Dallas, and you mentioned this in the book, that, is I don't know, I never can pronounce shit like this, but Izvestia, but like one of the main Russian newspapers, basically published a list of like British journalists who are spies.
Yeah.
He's on it. That a list that's probably, in retrospect, fairly accurate.
Completely true. Like in the like at that point, they were all like, "Oh, well, nonsense. Of course, we're not spies. That's what the Soviets do." They, 50 years later or something like that, they found these memos inside the BBC, which was supposed to be the clean one. You could hear people places like the Sunday Times, the Daily Telegraph, like. People knew that, there were kind of like, there were people doing a bit of moonlighting at best.
Yeah.
But BBC wasn't supposed, it was supposed to be clean. It's like, this man was going like, oh yeah, we should be sympathetic to these friends. And friends is friend is the key word for spooks, for spies in England. Caught in this scandal, we should do something about it. Send them some flowers or something. It's just like, Izvestia was essentially just telling the truth. It was not like a disinformation campaign. And funnily enough, in 1977, as Holden was killed, the American press was stormed by these accusations that a lot of American journalists and a lot of foreign journalists have been working for the CIA. There's been at least 3 major exposés. There was one in, of all places, Penthouse, but they used to publish, some great investigations back in the day. I don't know about now.
I'll check into it after the episode.
Rolling Stone, Carl Bernstein published this, I don't know how long it was, like 45,000 word, massive fucking piece, which was titled The CIA and the Media. And then a 3-part series by the New York Times, which literally came out a week after Holden was assassinated. And, funny enough, they were talking about British journalists working for the CIA. They were talking about people doing this kind of, the work that you mentioned, this kind of, InfoWar, sort of like the fake news of its era.
Yeah. I mean, this happened. We talked about this a lot in an episode we did on Chile many, many, many years ago. But there were a number, especially in Chile, for example, of like journalists that were essentially given like marching orders by the CIA, like write about this, try to inflame tensions here, do this, do that, etc. And so like they might not be paid up employees, agents of the CIA, but they're functionally, they're willing assets or in some cases, unknowing, if you're really stupid, an unknowing asset. But yeah, who are on marching orders.
Or there were some people like this guy, Stuart Alsop, was, again, another one, like closeted gay and New York Times columnist or whatever, New York Times foreign correspondent, sorry. And he was saying, "Oh, I'm a patriot. If they asked me to do something, I'd gladly do it."
Exactly.
Deny of being in the pay of the CIA, so just doing it for free, essentially. It's funny, in the JFK files that were released over the last few days, there's one memo which is I can't remember the name of the journalist now, but maybe we're able to check later. But it was a CIA memo which it was basically the green light for this woman to write for Encounter. So, and I had never seen that before. So essentially, the CIA was actually vetting people to write for the magazine, and that's because, according to Jefferson Morley, James Angleton, James Jesus Angleton, this guy was in charge of Encounter. It was his pet project. There's all this disinformation /
propaganda,
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
He was behind all of that. And so to me, that was such a fascinating moment when I was like, wow. So Angleton has got, he was somehow at least involved with Encounter, and the idea that Angleton, the guy, would be in. I mean, we talked about the fact that the British were supposed to be the spy masters, right? Angleton had been trained in the dark arts of counter-espionage by Kim Philby himself. And the reason why Angleton went completely fucking batshit crazy was because of Philby's betrayal and the mole hunt, the defectors, all that crazy shit, the wilderness of mirrors. I was like, I remember, I've still got goosebumps if I'm thinking about this, when I was like, wait a second. Holden was writing for Encounter. Angleton was in charge of Encounter. Holden was in Beirut at the same time as Philby. I was like, my head went.
Yeah. Who's playing who? Who's through the looking glass? Are they even aware of where they are in their own plot?
Exactly. That's without maybe getting into the weeds, but that was one of the questions. It's like, did they know? What did Philby know? What did Holden know? This guy was working for the CIA. He'd probably been recruited by MI6 when he was at Cambridge. He had this strange experience when he was supposed to be sent to Czechoslovakia to become a teacher at British Institute or whatever, which is a way of, again, it's another cover for MI6 junior officers. And then all these connections to Philby. There was another guy called Patrick Seal, who was Philby's successor as the Middle Eastern correspondent from Beirut for The Observer. So he was Philby's successor, and according to some, had also been very close to the KGB. He was rumored to have been recruited by the MI6 and then kicked out because he had an unproven KGB connection. And then Peter had found out that Patrick Seal had told one of his girlfriends that he was Philby's Paris drop when he was in Paris, which basically means that whenever Philby was traveling to Paris to feed some stuff to the Soviet that was related to France, he would go to this guy, and this guy would just pass it on to the Soviet Union.
Amazing.
This guy was Holden's agent for this book, literary agent for this. It's a strange word, agent, for this book that Holden was writing about Saudi Arabia. And again, that was one of the things that when he was killed, there was a question mark. It's like, wait, was it to do with the fact that he was writing a book about Saudi Arabia? Because he told this French journalist that he'd uncovered corruption in high places. Was that one of the reasons? Saudi Arabia at that point, it's very interesting, had become an ally of Egypt I don't know how much we want to get into geopolitics here, but
I mean, I don't know when you have to go, but we can definitely talk about this. Absolutely.
They will fire me at some point, but maybe not today.
I'm having a fucking blast talking about this, so I'm ready to rock as long as you are.
Thank you. Saudi Arabia had been an enemy of Egypt for many years. They were effectively fighting Egypt through proxies in Yemen.
Well, yeah, because Egypt under Nasser, in this sort of like an Nasserism, Egypt had become sort of like a counterforce to these monarchies within the Middle East, which were in some places having sort of a tenuous, and especially Yemen, having this sort of tenuous grip on their countries. And so Nasser, with this, who had himself overthrown a monarchy, as sort of emerging as this sort of nationalist counterforce to them. So yeah, I mean, the Saudis had to see this guy as like big public enemy number one.
It was. I mean, they were trying to assassinate him, repeatedly. Obviously, the Brits were trying to assassinate him, and the French were trying to assassinate him. The Israelis were trying to. I mean, Nasser was, not liked in certain circles because of this, because of Nasser, and because of this idea of pan-Arabism, and because he was such an inspiring figure for nationalist movements in their own countries, as you mentioned. I mean, it's kind of crazy, like Americans who know this kind of shit, history stuff. I'm impressed.
We certainly we had some dealings in the Middle East as America during Nasser's time, but especially after with Sadat. I mean, Kissinger and all that. But
if I tell someone here, if I talk about Nasser, they ask me for some protein shake or something like that.
It does sound like one. It does sound like one. And Sadat does sound like an American film named Pootie Tang, sort of what he says during that movie.
Now, you know what? Sadat always reminded me of that guy from Street Fighter.
Tiger uppercut.
One of the...
Yes. I know you're talking about.
Anyway.
Well, he's a piece of shit. We don't like Sadat around here.
Okay, so this is the thing. Like, I'm going to try to make it very simple, but Egypt and Saudi Arabia were enemies, mortal enemies, for many years. When the president of Egypt was this guy called Nasser. Nasser dies of a heart attack, allegedly. No. He died of a heart attack.
No, he died. He died of a heart attack.
No, he died of a heart attack. And his successor, who was supposed to be this sort of interim figure, Anwar Sadat, starts this process of actually completely shifting his country's allegiances from the Soviet Union, which had been Egypt's main ally. I mean, Egypt was supposed to be like an independent country. What was it called? Like the third...
non-aligned state.
Non-aligned state. But in reality, the CIA had nicknamed Egypt the Soviet Republic of Egypt.
Which was a bit unfair, because I feel like the Soviets did... It's funny, Philby actually sort of expresses this in a rather rude way in his interview with the Sunday Times, because he says he talks shit on Nkrumah there. But it gives a little insight into like this. The Soviets actually got very frustrated oftentimes with their third world allies. I don't know if Egypt counts as third world, but like with their peripheral allies, let's say, because they would find these countries that were like, they have a guy like Nasser or something in there, or the succession of leaders that there were in Syria until ending up with Assad. And, they would kind of give him all these money. They give him all these tanks. They give him all these technical advisors.
Yeah.
And then they would just blow them by having the worst armies ever and fucking fighting against Israel and just like losing and, lose all your airplanes or lose all your tanks. And the Soviets would have to be like, I guess we have to send you fucking 500 more tanks, man. Thank you.
Or planes like jet fighters or whatever.
Exactly.
All these MiGs.
We lost all our MiGs again. It's like, all right, dude. Like, cool.
It's like, we spent billions of rubles of,
I mean, there's an excellent book by Patrick Seal about Assad that sort of goes into the minutia of the Soviet and later Kissinger's the dealings with Assad, like, you know, like, okay, we got to send these technicians or he's going to get really pissed at us, but he's being a bitch. So like, we got, and it's just, there's a palpable sense of frustration from the Soviets there.
Yeah. I mean, and what Sadat did very quickly, so they were trying to topple him, you know, straight away. Like there was this attempted coup, and this plot to actually oust him. And he managed to survive. There's a question mark in terms of how he did it. There's an official narrative, and then, as is often the case in the Middle East, there's, you know, the actual what really happened behind the scenes. The unofficial thing is that actually the CIA was helping him because they wanted him to shift sides from the Soviet Union to the American camp. And that's precisely what he did. Like he decided to form this alliance with the Saudis. There was this guy called Kamal Adam. American people should know about this guy because he was involved in this massive fucking scandal. I mean, you talked to Christian about the Octopus murders, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The BC CI scandal, which is this massive banking, I mean, if I think about the BCCI stuff,
dude, it touches like, everything. I mean, that's a yeah.
Anyway, Kamal Adam was one guy who was it was the head of Saudi intelligence services. He was an incredibly rich guy. He was the brother of King Faisal of Saudi Arabia's favorite wife. He had many wives, I guess. Anyway, it was very close to Sadat, to the point that Sadat had been a witness to his marriage, and Kamal Adam was there when Sadat decided to expel all these thousands and thousands of Soviet advisors from Egypt, and then went to war with Israel, and then immediately after the war started doing this thing of, you know what, we got rid of the Soviets, we might just, turn towards the Americans, because why not? And in 1974, the American embassy is reopened officially in Cairo, which had been closed since 1967 because Nasser had kicked them out. And most importantly, a sizable CIA station. Mm-hmm. And what I found in the new investigation is that 1974 was a crucial year within the Holden investigation. Shall I say why?
Yes, you should say why, dude.
In 1974, a Canadian journalist named David Holden went to Cairo, landed at Cairo airport late at night, came out, and he was approached by two men in scruffy suits who introduced themselves as Egyptian officials, who said, "Are you David Holden?" "Yes." "Well, we're going to drive. We've got a car for you. It's a battered Fiat, and we're going to drive you to your destination." "Oh, that's very kind of you." Whatever. Like he hadn't told anyone that he was coming, so he was a bit baffled. But he was like, I could do with a lift. It's late at night. I'm tired. You go into the car, and as the car drives off, these two gentlemen sitting in the back starts asking him questions. It's like, and it's just like, he's a bit baffled by the questions. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about. Naming names. And then he's like, I decided to ask the question that he wanted to ask them. It's like, how did you know that was coming, by the way? Like, how did you know? I haven't told anyone. And the guy said, "Well, you were David Holden of the Sunday Times, aren't you?" "No, I'm sorry, you got the wrong person. I'm David Holden from CBC, from Canadian Broadcasting Corporation." So they start talking to each other, these two Egyptian guys. They start talking Arabic, and it's like, what the fuck? Like, these fucking Westerners all look the same. They've got the same fucking names, right? And then they're like, okay, well, you know what? We're going to drive you to your hotel, and thank you very much. I leave him there, sped up. Didn't think about this. Holden didn't think about this until 3 years later. If he hears that David Holden of the Sunday Times flown into Cairo, had been picked up at the airport, driven around in a battered car, and shot to the heart. And actually, that came quite graphically because someone in Canada did the same mistake as the Mukhabarat and said, David Holden for CBC has been killed in Cairo.
Oh, Lord.
It's like, this is why I'm saying, like, if I was writing a novel, I would go like, right, this shit is just like...
It's too much.
It's too much. Like,
yeah, you got to trim it down a bit.
Yeah, it's like you need to at least make it a bit more credible.
Well, but, you mentioned the Saudis here, and we've mentioned the Mukhabarat too. You know what? I can't pronounce it. I've tried to say it Mukhabarat. I've had to say it for years on this show. I just kind of try to swallow it a little bit when I say it, so people think I'm sort of misspeaking. We talked about the CIA, talked about the KGB, and it just seems like Holden is kind of existing in this world at like a nexus of these things. And you even describe it, I think, at one point, or you mentioned, you referenced the wilderness of mirrors. And it really does seem like once you dig under the surface here, or once you literally start digging under the surface here, that he is kind of in this like strange sort of reflective netherworld where like there's sort of allegiances that are rather unclear and personal connections that might be political or intelligence or work connections here.
Or personal. That as well.
Well, I want to go back to Silverman real quick because we've talked about a lot of his sort of other connections. These people who work for the OSS and people who work for the for the MI6. Silverman, you discover. I mean, this is the most fascinating person in the book to me. Not least because I love you. Spoiler alert: you find his letters, a trove of his letters, which seem incredible. I mean, his writing style. I sent you this earlier, but I'm just going to read an excerpt from one. And he's sort of talking about. He's writing to a friend about infiltrating the Labor Party in I think the I don't know when.
30s in England, 1935.
He says, as you know, I am an honorable member of the Labor Party, and then parentheses, oh no. If you have any idea of a reformist party, multiply it by 10,001 and you will get an idea of the totally rotten, stagnating, crazy state. Mold, ignorance, narrow-mindedness, fear of everything that smells slightly of communism, which is just an amazing sort of thing to write. But he, let's call a spade here. He seems to have been a communist, and not only a communist, a very dedicated communist. And at the same time, he seems to have been seducing, let's say, open-minded younger men into not only his boudoir, or luring them not only to his boudoir, but to the scarlet robe of communism. And it is, I mean, again, if one were writing a novel, I mean, this would be a character that would be like, okay, well, this is a few too many tropes here, but he seems entirely real, and it seems very clear at one point that he and David have a very close relationship.
Yeah. So what Peter had found is that by 1950, Holden and Silverman were already lovers. They were lying about how they met and the kind of circumstance. I mean, other than the fact that obviously being gay at that point was illegal, so the affair itself. But they were lying about the circumstances in which they met, about the stuff that they've been doing. They've been to Mexico together, which is an interesting place. Again, I don't want to talk about JFK here, but Mexico was a training ground for KGB people, and they lied about, I went to Mexico City, and I was doing some charity work for X, but then Peter checked and they were like, no, he did do some charity work for like a week, and then he was off. Well,
maybe they were doing remote work for like a B2B SaaS company.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yeah, in 1952. Not sure the Wi-Fi was great back then, but yeah. So 1950 to me, when I saw this, so I found this letters at some point. By the way, Silverman is describing Holden as his young pet. I mean, he describes lots of men that young men that he was shagging. Some descriptions are also pretty graphic. Like I spared some of the, but there was some point he was talking about, like, oh yeah, I'm here in the flesh, and when I say in the flesh, I mean it, or something. Like, it's just like
you should publish the erotic correspondences of Leo Silverman.
Yeah,
it was like too much info, Leo. Like I didn't need to know about this. But anyway, describes Holden as his young pet in this letter from 1950 or 1951. It was undated, and to me, that kind of made me reassess everything. Like at the beginning, we had these suspicions, all these suspicions about Holden doing work for MI6 and the CIA, etc. And then we had this idea that maybe, like, so many gay people at that point had been compromised. Like there's this thing called compromat, which is what the KGB was doing. I'm sure you're
brother. That is a word that every American knows from the fucking endless Trump Russia fucking op-eds.
I'm not talking about Trump, and his golden showers. I'm talking about the fact that effectively, especially people in certain businesses and certain industries, the press, like British journalists abroad, gay British journalists abroad, and again, Oxbridge educated, like all fit the mold, were exposed to this kind of stuff. Like I got people here in the office who told me, in 1981, I was this beautiful young woman that came to me while I was in Minsk and offered me go to a hotel room, and thank God I didn't, because she was a what do you call her? A swallow.
My advice.
The man equivalent was called a raven, and they were doing it with gay people. But especially with gay people, because that was much more damaging.
Exactly. I mean, listen, it's first of all, my advice, if you're in Minsk in 1981 and a beautiful young lady comes up and be like, fancy a shag? Have the shag, and then just be like, oh, no English. No, I don't know. I can't tell you anything. Oh yeah, send the pictures to my wife. I don't care. I'm cheating on her. What are you gonna do? But you're right. Like it was. I mean, this was also, funnily enough, kind of McCarthy's logic behind a lot of the Lavender Scare stuff. Here was that, like, okay, well, there's blackmail, but the gay blackmail is really how they're going to get you. And
which is funny, because McCarthy was gay himself, and the FBI had a dossier of him molesting young soldiers, and then J. Edgar Hoover, of course, notoriously. I mean, and then there's a question mark about Angleton.
Too, sure.
Like there's a question mark about Angleton, whether he was in love with Philby, for example, right? I mean, you could dismiss that as rumor or whatever, but there are. Anyway, the point is, we thought Holden had been MI6/CIA. He was right wing, and then at some point he'd been compromised by the KGB. Because he was gay, because he was working in the sensitive areas, and he would have been a great asset for the Soviets. But the fact that his fucking lover, the love of his life, the most important relationship of his career, the most important relationship of his life, was a KGB recruiter since the 1930s, and that he probably recruited him as a spy as early as 1949, 1950, completely changed the perspective of this whole thing. Because at that point, Holden wasn't even a fucking journalist. You see, like, it was before all of this. It was before Cambridge, before the Times. It was before he even, decided that he wanted to become a journalist, before he was sent And by the way, this is the other thing that struck us when we were searching into this. Suez, it was sent to Egypt in 1956. It was in Congo in 1960 when Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. It was in Yemen in 1962 at the time of the coup and counter coup and whatever. It was in Oman in 1970. It was in Chile in 1973 when Allende killed himself. And it was pretty much, I mean, this guy was a foreign correspondent, but he was there before this stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
He was there before Allende was deposed. He was there before Patrice Lumumba was arrested and assassinated. It was there before the fucking Suez crisis. So it's like, either this guy is incredibly lucky, or he's basically someone that, needs to be on the scene when this stuff happens so that he can debrief his handlers about what's going on. And the reason I think that this is, the most plausible explanation is because we found this diary of this other guy called John Slade Baker, who was Holden's predecessor as Sunday Times foreign correspondent from Cairo, who was doing exactly this. He was there at the time of the Suez Crisis, and he was working simultaneously for the Sunday Times and MI6. And he was writing it all in this, which we thought it was a diary. It wasn't a diary. This was the debrief that he was feeding to MI6. And the only reason we got this fucking document is like 5,000 pages of either handwriting or typewritten, detailed notes about who he was beating and what he was doing. I was like, this stuff. I was reading this stuff and I was like, who does this? Like, this is not a diary. This is like, you're getting into like, I met so-and-so at 3. And then in the pages, you could see like, met with head of station. He told me to do this, advised not to do that. It's like very clear. So the only reason we know, like we got this document is because his wife, the guy died. He had a heart attack as he was writing the fucking diary. And his wife was like, I've got all these papers. I don't know what to do. I'm going to give them to an archive at Oxford, the Middle Eastern Archive at St. Anthony's College in Oxford. And it's just one debrief of one agent, which spans many, I can't remember how many years and how many thousands pages. Can you just imagine how many of these documents are in the MI6 archive? Like, this is what blows my mind. Like, this was the debrief that he was sending. This is something that we realized because at some point he was actually talking about this. It was like, oh yeah, the Mukhabarat is tailing me. I hope I've got time to burn some of these papers before I get arrested. I don't know what's going to happen to me. And I've passed these papers that I'm writing to the secretary at the British Embassy, so she can send them by diplomatic pouch back to London, so they if I get arrested for my country, at least they know what's happening on the ground. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, this is, I was absolutely stunned. And this guy, by the way, talks about Holden, didn't trust him. Like, the funny thing is, instead, in the same paragraph, he's saying, oh yeah, Holden is a bit of a twat, but Kim Philby is such a gentleman. And
Philby. Yes.
And this was in 1961, I think, before Philby had been exposed and defected to the Soviet Union. So, and this guy, the guy that was writing this, this debrief was he fought in the war. He was like a patriot. Like he had absolutely no fucking clue who Philby was and what he was doing. And to me, like that line was just priceless. It was like, we see eye to eye, and I shall be glad to spend some time with him.
Of course.
We should say, before we wrap up, that, I mean, in the original investigation, the Sunday Times sued the CIA trying to get records and got nowhere, right? But you heard from them.
Yeah, so I feel like this is another we're opening a big parenthesis there.
Because I just want to know, like, how you briefly mentioned it, but like when you got the call.
Yes. So I gotta make it quick. Sunday Times asked the CIA nicely, do you have anything about David Holden in 1978? The CIA says, we haven't got anything about him. And the Sunday Times is a bit puzzled. It's like, you must have at least some files about this guy, right? British journalist assassinated in Cairo. You don't have anything about him? And they go like, well, actually, yeah, we do have some files, but it's kind of sensitive, so we're not going to release it. You're not going to see it. So the Sunday Times, Harold Evans was such a fucking legend. He decided to sue the CIA to get these documents, which was unprecedented. British newspaper sues the CIA. It was everywhere. And by the way, if you search for Holden in the CIA archive, that's pretty much the only thing that now shows up and now pops up. Sometimes, the lack of information is
more telling.
It's more telling and more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they appoint a judge to look at the files in camera. It means, the judge is going to go in, look at the documents in private, and then decide whether anything can be disclosed. And the judge was a fairly liberal judge who's been ruled in favor of the press before. The judge went in, looked at the documents, came back and said, absolutely fucking not. You're not going to get any of this stuff because it would endanger the security of the United States of America. So they did have something in their files about Holden. Anyway, fast forward to 2023, I think, 2022, instead of filing a fresh FOI request, a FOIA request, because it would take years to actually process, I decided to ask them to re-release some files that they had released in 2002. Someone had filed a FOIA request with the CIA for files about Holden and Leo Silverman. And the request said, the log from the CIA said that the request had been partially granted. So they must have released at least something, right? But it wasn't in the CIA archive. So, in the reading room that you can...
Yeah, like the one you find online, whatever, yeah.
So I was like, can I just see these files, please? I just filed, not a FOIA request. I just said, can you please disclose the files that were released with FOI, blah, blah, blah. And that's when I got this phone call from someone who introduced themselves by their first name only and said, I'm so-and-so from the agency. And I'm like, okay, which agency? It's like PR agency, like estate agency. I write about property. And they say Central Intelligence Agency. So I'm like, okay, I'm listening. What's this about? And they said, can we talk off the record? I said, yes. And they said, I just want to steer you off the idea that the CIA had anything to do with David Holden. And I was completely thunderstruck by that because that's not a question that I ask. I didn't ask, did David Holden work for the CIA, or did you guys bump off this guy, back in 1977? I didn't ask any of those questions. So I just wanted the files that you guys had previously released about Holden. And that's when this person says, there's nothing in our files about Holden. And I'm like, that's impossible. Like, what you're telling me is just impossible. It's completely odd with this case. And I explained.
There's nothing in there? Yeah.
There's nothing in our files about David Holden. I'm like, I can't, it's impossible. And this person says, I'm sorry, I can't offer you no guidance, but I just want to steer you off the idea. Except, fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, after the serialization of our book comes out, and the CIA has gone on the record to say, I sent you the audio. I can't remember exactly what they said. It's like,
we do it. Can we play it here?
I think so, yeah.
That was Peter Gilman. He co-wrote the book Murder in Cairo with Emmanuel Midolo. In a statement to the world, the CIA said it strongly denies the claim it was involved in or responsible for Holden's death.
Which is a claim we never made. Like, we didn't make that claim, or at least not in the, not in the newspaper and not directly. But if you read the book, what we basically haven't included in any of the articles of the serialization is It's the name of this guy who was the CIA station chief in Cairo in 1977. And I guess if you want to know more about him, you can read the book, Murder in Cairo. Is that good enough?
Yeah, it's an excellent story.
Let me tell you, there's so much from the book that we couldn't even get into. There's so much from fucking the serialization we couldn't get into.
Yeah.
It is a insane fucking story. And I think if you read the book, you will understand why maybe we mentioned the Philby and the Philby stuff so much and the trauma from Philby so much. Because it seems like perhaps, Holden was murdered, one could say as a form of like trauma release or trauma healing from Western intelligence. Because there is, a lot of shit that happens in this fucking book. And the investigation it is also very touching that you were able to sort of bring this, do this with Peter Gilliman. I mean, how just kind of to end us off here. I mean, he is, he's in his 80s. How is he feeling about all this?
Oh, he's very relieved. And, he had made this promise to Harry Evans, and the fact that he could finally, fulfill the promise and also like crack the case that's been nagging him for so long. It's just a fantastic feeling. That's what he's saying. He was saying yesterday during the book party. It's like it's the best feeling. And to me, the crucial quote of this whole thing, it's a line that this Sunday Times writer, Sunday Times journalist called Cyril Connolly had written back in the 1950s. He was obsessed with the case of the two missing diplomats who turned out to be KGB spies. And he wrote this beautiful line. This was back when journalists can actually write. He said, "Those who become obsessed with a mystery are likely not to solve it." And I just love that line because it's so many people have been trying to solve the Holden case throughout the years, including people here in my newspaper, but nothing was published. It just ruined some people's life. I mean, if you read the book, you'll see so many of Holden's friends, for example, became obsessed with it, and they started asking everyone about, who killed David, and one of the crucial pieces of the jigsaw puzzle was actually coming from one of these obsessive people, but he just didn't do anything with that information. He just, went back home, told his wife, and he just couldn't prove it, despite all this obsession. So there's something poetic to me about the fact that, there's this old guy who's been working at the Sunday Times 50 years ago. I'm working on the Sunday Times now, and we've been trying to solve the murder of the Sunday Times guy. It's been a privilege for me to work on, such a story.
What did we learn, Brace?
I think, I don't know. I learned that. So did the KGB, you ever think about it, they just had 50 gay dudes that are you got to go fuck a guy in Warsaw tonight? They had a twink farm somewhere?
That's a good question.
I think about that sometimes.
I mean, maybe a lot of people that are ready to do whatever they needed to do for the cause.
Yeah. It's listen, I need you to fuck a 75-year-old, cultural attaché.
So, question, Brace. If you were in that position as a God-fearing communist,
no kissing. I wouldn't do kissing.
You were not on the mouth, but you were, you were given instructions that for your country needs you to go to Minsk and meet with, a foreign attaché at a bar.
Well, I would say this. I'd be listen, I mean, no disrespect to my superiors.
You just
when
saluted.
I say this. I'm saluting while I'm doing it. Well, I'm saluting to show that I mean no disrespect, but no disrespect to my superiors. But I think that my talents, which are at the absolute, full disposal of our socialist motherland here, I don't know if seduction or like, I don't know.
Sort of like, I don't know if you might have to refuse the premise of the question.
Yeah, I'm just like, do you think I will do whatever you guys want for me to do? Gay for pay, whatever. But do you think this is a good idea? Like, that's my question. Like, did you run out of guys? Because I just don't think that I am.
Like, maybe you're more suited for like the art of annoyance.
Yeah. Or like if you're trying to stir up like anti-Semitism somewhere or something like that. Like if you want to deploy me, if you want just like someone to be annoying somewhere, I can do it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if seduction is really now this is, and I mentioned this when we were talking to Monsieur Medolo. If I am a cultural attaché in Minsk in 1981 and some bird comes and perches on my windowsill, I'm going up to the nest. But like, here's the thing is people don't understand is they're like, oh, I got seduced by this fucking spy. Well, just don't tell them anything. Like, what
that is a good question, which is sort of like, why are you telling all these people things?
Don't tell anybody anything. Why are spies?
Did anyone think to train their spies on not telling secrets?
It's just, that seems to be like the number one, like, because if you get that out of the way, you're kind of good on everything else. Like, you don't even have to be like, don't fuck anybody, don't blah, blah, blah. You just be like, don't tell anybody anything.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Philby was pretty well trained.
I know. I love Philby.
Yeah. What a character.
It's just like.
Here's my question. Do guys like this still exist?
Like a Philby kind of guy?
I don't know. There's something so like when we were talking about how all these guys getting so lost in their own sauce and like you don't know if you're a character or driving the plot or writing the plot or even if when you wrote the plot, if you're still in charge of writing the plot, but you're in it and all this stuff. And I wonder if like there's something very romantic about obviously
definitely
this whole, the 60s, 70s, 80s kind of this like height of, especially as we're saying in the newsrooms at all of these places. It's just so fascinating. And I feel like is there the swirl of the romanticism in spy world? Is it still there?
I would say like, because I think about this too sometimes. It's like occasionally there will be like busts of spy rings, right? Or like there'll be some stuff that they're like, I don't know what's going on here. Like when they just like, I think the U.S. just ejected like 3 Chinese dudes who had been in the army here, and they, like, kind of accused them of being spies. But like that's not like a Philby type, you know what I mean? And it's like I feel like now, I mean, obviously China has like a different ideology than the US, but like there isn't sort of this like global clash of ideologies where like in the same way, I think that's fairly uncontroversial to say. And so I don't know if there is like, because I feel like a type of this caliber, of the Philby caliber, has to be like a true believer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas like you're not going to get that with like the money or blackmail or whatever else kind of shit that you can do.
Yeah.
And like you need somebody who is like believes in their heart in the cause. And so like I'm assuming somewhere that there is someone like this, but there really hasn't really been anything like this kind of since Angleton's days.
Yeah.
Of course, Jonathan Pollard.
Oh my God, stop it.
God, he's amazing. He really, and he looks like the guy in that sort of video of like, if someone doesn't take your house, who's going to take you out? Like that guy. Pollard looks like that. He looks like shit. And there was that chick who seduced Eric Swalwell. Remember?
Yeah. I think some of the Huawei stuff gets a little interesting, but we've never really looked into it. But that's an interesting story there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like, and then there was that sort of period where China just like shut down all these CIA stations sort of like overnight. Mm-hmm. That was kind of amazing. I think the Chinese probably got some fucking, I mean, they had a dude
shooters,
allegedly. I mean, the US said they had a guy in like Feinstein's office, and I think in Pelosi's office too.
I fucking hope so. Where's
Me too.
Nancy?
Where's Nancy? I know,
Yeah,
I'm like,
however you say that in Chinese.
the Chinese were probably spying on Feinstein and be like, this lady's fucking brain dead. We need someone to help her. You know what I'm talking about? We need to put a guy in there to do like, we need the CPS, Chinese Protection Services. We need somebody in there to help this lady down the fucking
Chinese
stairs.
are like, is this really what's going on here? I feel like we should alert someone.
Well, the Chinese, of course, respect, they respect the wisdom of the elderly. And so they
Sure.
probably saw Feinstein
Because
sort of being.
they're like, she thinks in centuries.
Exactly. Like, oh, she's been here for several centuries. She knew Sun Yat-sen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they're like, we have to protect this like venerable ancient. And so when Feinstein was sort of being led around by these 30-year-old interns, which is crazy to be 30-year-old intern, but no disrespect to anyone who is. And they were probably like, we need to send a Chinese guy over there to like care for her as we care for
Right.
the elderly.
And to like understand her wisdom.
Her wisdom, exactly, because she's probably got wisdom. She like knew, they probably were like, oh, she knows Washington. You know what I'm saying? Like she knew Washington.
Her eyeballs are falling out of her skull.
Yeah. He's like, so Ben Franklin, I mean, he was such a polymath.
And he
Like,
had
what
a
was
kite.
But what was he like in person? Like, what was
Yeah.
Ben Franklin? What did he do? You know? I don't know. I there has to be, but I feel like there's so much of this stuff can be like something that you would have to necessarily use a journalist for, like even like a shitty kind of like stringer journalist for in the 60s can just be done by like a bot farm, in Cambodia now.
Isn't that so sad?
It's so sad.
I do think, I mean, not to name names, but you can go through and find out for yourself. There's a great tip in this story. Look for the journalists who have rising careers real fast.
Uh-huh.
There's, rumors that swirl among them about
Well,
being well placed.
We have talked to a journalist who has encountered a later admitted black cube spy.
Yeah.
It's just, it's.
Yeah, I guess
think
the private world does feel
I know,
a
but
bit.
I think that there's a difference between that and like a Philby. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Could you imagine Kash Patel dealing with Philby?
Dude, Kash Patel can't even see straight.
He is fucked up looking, huh? Is it? But is
Can
he
you
like,
imagine like Hegseth? Sorry, I'm just
Hegseth
imagining them
brutally-
drinking together.
There's God, the fucking like the Russians send like a beautiful woman to Stuth Hegseth. And he's just already cheating on his wife with another woman he's not interested. And he's just like, the Chinese send a guy, he just brutally beats the guy up for being Chinese because he's in a drunken rage. Yeah, I know. I feel like our oafish, ogrish, like they could probably be seduced by like a battle pass for Call of Duty.
Yeah, you just give them a fucking mirror and they jack off looking into it.
Yeah, I know.
Fucking freaks.
Yeah, I'm like, I wish we knew more about it because China's probably got some good spy stuff. But I know there's so much electronic surveillance now that it's like you don't need to like pump someone necessarily. Like you can just look at their phone.
I know, that's so boring.
I know.
That's
They
why don't put anything interesting on your phone. And maybe once we all start doing that, we'll get some good spies.
Exactly. Or put something interesting on my phone. Everything I look at sucks. But it would be funny if they were just like blackmailing random people by like, looks like you spent 3 hours looking at warts on TikTok and like wart removal surgery. And would you like your
Is
family
this,
to
sorry,
know
is this something that you want to mention?
No, you saw me burn my wart off.
When?
3 years ago on tour. Or 2 years ago, I had a wart on my hand. Remember?
Oh, that's right.
I burned that fucking shit off.
Yeah, I didn't.
And then I got pneumonia.
Unrelated, I think.
You don't know that.
All right, everyone. I'm Liz.
My name's Bryce. I'm from the
Where are you
Lake
from
District.
now?
The Lake District. Where people are seafaring people or lakefaring people. The Lake District. I'm from the Lake District. And of course, we're joined by producer
Young Chomsky.
And this has been TrueAnon. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey